So I realized something the other day. I've talked about my books on this channel, and it's usually in passing when we're talking about whether it's a series or how to write an action scene, but it's always when I'm explaining something else, and I've never really sat down and introduced any of you to Cole Harper. And that's kind of ridiculous. Because, yeah, a lot of you are readers, but there's a good number of you who have found this channel through the writing videos or craft commentary, or maybe even just randomly, finding some content. You don't really know who Cole Harper is, or even why I started writing the series. So that's what this video is going to be. It's the story behind my story, if that makes in a weird Deadpool fourth wall kind of way. But it's where Cole Harper came from. It's how the whole series started, why I chose the genre I did, and then what I've been working on to keep the character alive across 5 books, soon to be more. And no, I'm not trying to sell you my books. I would love it if you ordered my books, and the links are in the channel description and even in the description on this video. But this is just to pull the curtain back a little bit, for writers, readers, and anyone who's, wondering how you build a character that can keep going without feeling like a rerun. So everything started back in February of this year. I was really just bored one day, and I'm sitting in the chair in the living room, and my wife doesn't watch the same kind of movies that I do. She doesn't read the same kind of books that I do. And really, we had seen everything there was worth seeing. We've got 50 different streaming services. And I just went back to Old Faithful. I sat down and I rewatched the Indiana Jones trilogy, all 3 of them, back to back. And then from there, I rolled straight into the Brendan Fraser Mummy movies. The third one sucks, but it is what it is. And I don't know, something just kind of clicked. I've been a professional writer for over half a decade now, but I never had my own fiction series. I've got some nonfiction books out there, but most of what I do is ghostwriting or editing for other people. But I've always loved the kind of stories like in the Indiana Jones and the Mummy movies. It's adventure, it's history meets myth, and these characters who survive by guts, instinct, and really a lot of dumb luck. But I started thinking, what if I created a character like this? And that's where Cole Harper came from. He's not a superhero, and he's not the chosen one. And no, he doesn't have a whip or a fedora or a destiny to be the protector of things. He's just a guy who's been through a lot, and he's kind of got a knack for surviving things when they go sideways. So he's a smuggler. He was born in Texas. His mom and dad are dead. He joined the Army Air Corps just before the beginning of World War II because he didn't really have anywhere else to go. And he got in trouble. He was smuggling. He was never a fighter pilot. He flew transports. I didn't want to have a character that he was some super secret agent ace pilot guy. I didn't want to do that. He was just flying transports, and he got in trouble doing illegal things. He was smuggling contraband in and out of Europe during the war. But he has a code, and that code is really, in the beginning, more about survival than it is honor. But at the same time, he has some moral lines he won't cross, or even just when it comes to standing up to a bully kind of thing. And even though he'll tell you he doesn't care, and even though he'll say he's just in it for the money, he somehow keeps getting dragged into things that really matter. And I built him on just a couple of basic rules. One, it's if the money's right, take the job. And always have an exit plan. But the fun part is that every single book breaks those rules. he starts out wanting nothing more than to do a smuggling job, stay out of trouble, get paid, and then disappear into a bottle. But it's not some grand mission that he's looking for. And it's in the friction between who he says he is and who he keeps being forced to become that the story really comes alive. And so once I had Cole Harper figured out, the rest of it kind of fell into place. The first book was The Last Nazi, and he's just chilling in a bar in Havana, just finished a smuggling job, when he gets approached by this beautiful young British woman who happens to be an MI6 agent, and she's going to hire him for a job. And it turns out she's being hunted by some old remnants of the Third Reich, and he gets pulled into a global chase and a hunt to find the Spear of Destiny. It's really fast, it's really tight, and it's rooted in real history like all of my novels are. Because I didn't want to start with something too outlandish. I just wanted it to feel possible. And then the second book came. I was so excited with having finished the first book that I couldn't wait to start the second one. And that was The Tomb of the Jaguar King. And again, he's just running guns to some rebels. And the next thing you know, he's captured by some mercenaries who happen to be down there enslaving the locals and the rebels. And he gets dragged into that. And so by the time I got to book 3, which is The Plague of the Pharaohs, I started pushing a lot harder into some real world mystery. So the story is built around this idea that Cleopatra may have had access to something dangerous. And we know from history that she had a relationship with Julius Caesar. She had a relationship with Mark Antony. And the Ptolemies were in conflict with Rome. So what if I can take that and turn it into something? None of the books are fantasy. They're rooted in real history, real myth, real legend. But the thing about history is we don't have all of the answers. We don't know where Cleopatra is buried. We don't know where Alexander the Great is buried. There's plenty of real world treasures and artifacts that haven't been found yet. And the fun part about it is we get to ask, what if? And then around that time, I wanted to write a fourth one because I'm just writing these things back to back. And I realized that these are all going to seem like reruns of each other if I don't start adding some more depth to Cole Harper and who he is. So when I wrote The Lost Expedition, I bring in someone from Cole's past because, like I said, I knew that I can't just keep throwing artifacts and legends at this guy and pretend that none of it really has an effect on him. And I had to shift the character a little bit so the overarching story of the series can grow a little. And then book 5, which is the one I just released a few days ago. Today is May 14th, 2025. And that, so on the 12th, book 5 came out. And I'm not going to go into any spoilers on it, but by now, Cole Harper is not the same guy that you meet in The Last Nazi. Now, he still plays by his rules, and he still, has a lot of smart aleck comments, and he keeps one foot ready to just be in it for himself. But the world has caught up to him a little bit. Some of the characters you meet over the first 4 books have been recurring throughout the whole series. And the damage and those evolving relationships is starting to show a little bit. Because if we're being honest, you can only live this kind of life for so long before something gives, and I don't want to fake that. Cole is still flying his half-broken plane to places he shouldn't be. The risks are starting to get a little more personal, and the consequences are cutting a little deeper, and he can't just walk away anymore. And The thing that nobody tells you when you're writing a series like this, and I had to discover it for myself, especially in pulp adventure, which is a classic genre, but you have to keep the character real. It's not just make the story entertaining. It's not just keep the action fresh. Because you can throw all the treasure maps and the mercenaries and secret societies that you want to at your character, but if he doesn't feel like he's moving, if he's a real person, and if he does feel like he's just keep being reset to default after every book, it's not going to work. So the real challenge of a series like this isn't coming up with a plot. It's more about making sure that your protagonist, your hero or anti-hero or whatever, isn't just becoming a rerun of himself. And so I know that Cole has to evolve as the series goes on. Now, it doesn't have to be dramatic in some kind of over-architected way, but just small, quiet ways that normal people change. There's regret, there's damage, there's some unexpected connection. The adventure might be open-ended, but the man living through it isn't. He's aging, he's remembering, and if I ignored any of that and I kept treating him like he was just encased in glass, break just in case of an emergency, it would kill it. But that's where it gets tricky too. See, readers expect pace and tension when you're writing in a genre like pulp adventure because it comes with some really tight boundaries. And yeah, everybody expects something to explode or a really cool action sequence on top of a plane or a train or a crumbling temple or ruin. And yeah, I have all those things, but that's the contract. If you slow things down too much, if you get too internal or introspective, it stops feeling like pulp. And you lose that punchy boots on the ground rhythm that makes the whole genre tick. But if you don't give the character some extra room, just room enough to change, and if he resets every time like nothing has happened, you're writing an action scene that doesn't really have any weight, and that's so much worse. So the challenge is, how do you let a character grow without breaking the format? And if you look at Indiana Jones, even though I don't count the last two movies as canon because they ruined things, Harrison Ford got older, and he had things happening in the background in between the movies. Now, with a book, you don't have to have things happen in between, unless they just aren't that interesting. But Indiana Jones in Raiders of the Lost Ark, which was chronologically the second movie, because everybody knows that Temple of Doom was a prequel. But in Raiders of the Lost Ark, something has happened in the past where he's met Marion Ravenwood before. They had a relationship. And that all comes flooding back, and it takes effect and has influence over everything that happens to him over the franchise. He has a son with her. That son dies in the Second World War. And all those things affect him. So, yeah, I'm not going to write any chapters about Cole's guilt or regret for grief, but I get a little subtle because this is a fast-paced genre, and every bit of character work has to do double duty. I got to let the damage show without stopping the story, and I can let some things slip out in some hesitations or some dialogue or things that Cole doesn't say. And I let these things show up in the way that Cole reacts to certain things that happen, or in the way he tightens up when something from the past, which may or may not have been covered in one of the previous books, gets mentioned. And that's the thing. If you want a series to last, the plot cannot be the only thing moving forward. Changes have to happen, even if they're quiet, if they're gradual, but they have to happen. So if you're trying to write this long-running series without letting the weight of the previous stories build up, and you're creating new covers for the same book over and over again, it'll work for a little bit, but after a while, it's boring, and you, as the writer, could really get burned out. And I noticed that was what happened when I was trying to write a completely different book for book 5. And I may come back to that story, but I don't know. It felt pointless, and I just couldn't keep writing it. So I had to write something different. And if nothing matters, then why keep reading, right? So why should I keep writing? But that's the difference in a series that will last versus a series that just keeps going. And I don't want it to be about how many places that I can take the character. I want it to be about how many places the character can take you. So the setting changes, the artifacts change, the mission changes. But if Cole isn't moving, then he's just an action figure. And I want to avoid that. I'm really happy with everything that has happened so far in the Cole Harper series. But when I first started the series, I was really thinking about how Lee Child did Jack Reacher. And yeah, I've mentioned him in a few videos before. But Jack Reacher starts off in his 30s, and then 20, 30 books later, he's in his 50s. And Lee Child does a very good job of aging Reacher and keeping him relevant by pulling in random elements from the background of Reacher's past or his personality that just add to his lore, and then that lore has a specific effect on what happens in that book. And I was thinking, I could go with Cole Harper for 20 books, but I can't do that if I don't let him change. So I don't know if I'm going to kill Cole Harper. I don't know if he's the kind of guy that gets a happy ever after ending. I don't know if he's just going to keep going until there's nothing left, and he's got no other choice but to retire. But I do know that the series is going to keep going for a good while now. At least 5 more, because I'm already working on book 6. And so 5 more on top of that. Unless something changes, because I don't know what happens to Cole in every book before I write it. I let the story lead me on discovery as much as I do the readers. I don't know what's going to happen. Something happens and then Cole reacts, and that sets off a chain reaction. And I don't let an outline or a plot. I've got this very obscure lines drawn all over chart here on my whiteboard where I'm just working out one particular plot point. Because it has to make sense and it has to be logical. But I don't know the consequences of those things until I write them. But that's who Cole Harper is. Cole Harper is Indiana Jones meets Nathan Drake meets Rick O'Connell from The Mummy, and yet he's none of those people. Those characters are certainly inspirations and influences, but I don't want it to be Indiana Jones with a plane. I don't want it to be Nathan Drake with a plane. I don't want it to be, Rick O'Connell, who's a criminal. He's just a guy who's living in the same world that we live in. And he just happens to do a lot more cool stuff than most of us do. But anyway, that's who Cole Harper is. That's why I write this series. And it's through writing this series that, even though I've ghost written over 100 novels, but anyway, that's who Cole Harper is. And it's through writing this series that I'm learning more about writing, even though I've authored over 100 books as a ghostwriter, both fiction and nonfiction. It's when you're doing something like this Because most of my ghost writing projects are I meet the client, I write the book, I get paid, and then I never revisit that character again. And so Cole Harper is the only person that I've written about that is stuck around this long. And so I'm learning as I go. But the reader feedback is awesome. The books are selling, people love the series, and I'm not stopping anytime soon. But I do know that a real guy, a real person can't go on forever. And so Cole can't either. Eventually, he's going to have to come to an end. How that happens, I don't know. Because I don't know how my own journey is going to end. You don't know how yours is going to end. And eventually, something has to give. Either the world's going to calm down, just like how the Wild West stopped being and there was no world left for gunslingers and outlaws. That might happen to Cole Harper. But like I said in the beginning of this video, I haven't covered who Cole Harper is, why he's doing the things he's doing, or why I began the series. And I felt like that was important. You guys are watching all of my videos, you're subscribing to the channel, and I wanted to go ahead and get that out there. But as always, I appreciate you guys watching. I appreciate you guys listening, subscribing, liking, commenting. If you've got questions or comments, I read all of them. I reply to all of them. Let me know, and I'll see you guys on the next one.